All right, so we have a more recent short reviews column here, and again, it's 7 items, I think, and nothing too intensive. You could probably tell I was tired when I was writing this. Some of it just doesn't connect in a very artful way, so yeah, we'll just get right into it there. Um, Up front is now I didn't get sent Obituary's latest album. I just picked it up out of habit because I like to support the band and go see them live whenever they're coming through town. And Dying of Everything is a pretty typical obituary record. I see a lot of people saying, well, I don't think I need this one. It is album number 11. But at the very least, this is better than most anything they put out since Frozen in Time. It's just more straightforward. Maybe there's too many songs, but the guitar tone is great. Album art is pretty nice. And my only real complaint here is that we don't really get enough John Tardy in the vocals. He just doesn't stick out like he did back on a lot of the classics. Uh, you know, my personal favorite has evolved from those first two albums towards the fourth. So there's just there's a lot of personality in World Demise, and I think that was kind of the peak for the band where they set that the bar so high that the influence spread for that band. So that's how I gauge all their albums past that point, and this is one that it kind of comes close on some of these songs. Some of them are a little bit throwaway or they don't feel that serious, but again, I don't think this is the kind of band that's trying to be that serious all the time. They are out to have a good time. They do have a good time when they're on tour, so you get that feeling again from one of their records. So um, yeah, I enjoyed it. If I'm going to pick up and listen to an obituary record in the next couple of years, I'll just probably jump to this one. And yeah, I think they pull it off pretty well here. Uh, so then we have by Sante's Broken, which is their second album for Extreme Music, and this is um, a somewhat extreme metal influenced psychedelic stoner doom metal record, and one that focuses on a very serious, morose, but also a little bit romanticist kind of feeling, and with semi melodic vocals that really create the mood and the atmosphere, other than the uh, layers of keyboards that sort of accentuate the dirges. These feel like dirges of uh, you know tragedy and romance and um, the animal man, and there's an interesting theme here which I don't fully get, but I appreciate the sort of wrath of nature incurred in some of these songs. Um, so this is one of two projects from Vincente Paia, who is well, I would know him from Unbounded Terror, and we do get a little bit of like a death doom or death sludge kind of edge to some of these songs, but almost all of them are really focused on the vocals and supporting that part of the music. And this doesn't quite work for me on the first half of the album. Now, once the riffs start to kick up in the second half of the album and certain songs, I think then we get something that's just a little bit more my taste, something a little bit more directly doom metal and less focused on the effect of the vocals, which I didn't find very tuneful or catchy. So I liked the let's say early 2000s cathedral kind of feeling of some of the songs on the second half of the album, and I think those are worth checking out. Uh, Sons of Cult, back to the beginning. I think this is the debut from this traditional heavy metal slash hard rock band, and they've really they have this band has an interesting number of crossed wires between like late 70s, early 80s heavy metal, um, general 80s hard rock, and maybe even early 90s hard rock, where the vocalist never quite carries a tune, but the songs are catchy, and the guitarist never quite hits an unforgettable riff, but he always keeps it going. So it's kind of an either here nor there kind of heavy metal record for me, but It's very honest. It's well spoken. It's almost too wordy sometimes in terms of putting the lyrics before the catchiness of the phrase and whatnot. So it it didn't really strike me as the most memorable or fully developed, ready for a full length kind of album or band, but it was entertaining, and I think they could go somewhere with it if they just maybe hone in on uh, how they can support the vocal style a little bit better in terms of dynamics. That's kind of my only feedback is I think it all kind of moans out and moans outward into a general heavy metal kind of bar band feeling, and that's cool. It just didn't. Uh, it didn't hit as an album. I think maybe if I saw them live, I'd appreciate it more. Kind of get the feeling for the band a little bit better. So, Rigor Sardonicus is a kind of a underground New York death metal uh, group, which I've always described as basically Death Doom's Mortician, and almost only because they feature an old drum machine, which I don't think has changed very much since 1988 or whatever it was, but because their music is dark, it is morbid, it is just as focused on creating the doom metal side of things as it is death metal. And Praeparat Bellum is one of their albums that explores slower funeral doom size songs, more so than others. I think that there was some of the early stuff sounded a little bit like this too. It all kind of sounds generally the same because of well, it's very minimal music, and the resonance of it created in artificial space is sort of the dark basement level misery of all of it, which is it's pretty cool. It's a really interesting like if you're into real underground death metal, you'll understand why this is cool. And I hate to say that because it sounds kind of dorky, but it's got a lot of its own character, and it's so sparse and strange, and the vocals are pitch shifted. I know people will hate that, and it's like an an early grindcore era kind of feeling to it. But for me, that's their signature, and I've come to like it quite a bit. I think if you sit with the album for 5 minutes, you're not going to get it. Sit for the album for an hour, sit with their discography for a day, you'll get the feeling that they're putting out there, and it is very much rooted in good doom metal riffs, and they're very slow and sometimes hard to parse. And those are the best songs. I think later in the album, there's two 8 to 9 minute songs, and that's really where these guys shine. And they're longer, drawn out. The more miserable, the better. The filthier, the better. And by nature, all of it is very readable because it really is two guys and a drum machine, a bassist, a guitarist, a vocal, the guitarist slash vocalist, and a drum machine. So it's I hate to like it's very real. It's a cool thing. I like this album quite a bit. I kind of go on about it. I just didn't do a full review because I just didn't have anything new to say about the band. I've written about them a couple of times in the past, and it's really the kind of thing where you either get it or you don't. And you know, if you like early funeral doom but you don't like the gothic affect of it, this is a really cool band to discover. If you like those early Wild Rags releases past the speed metal, once he gets into more extreme doom metal and stuff like that, this is kind of a cool thing to add to your bank of knowledge, I would say. So the latest Isak Trillium album, Funeral, is it's going to have to be the one that puts me off the band, and that's unfortunate because I really liked their first like what 4 or 5 albums. I think Eternity of Shaug and Dieth, the one after it, they had sort of the musician had hit a peak of all of these ideas coming together in sort of a savant beauty. There was a progressive death, doom, blackened uh, sort of shapeshifter that was happening there that was just great. It was. it all really held together in an interesting, whacked out kind of way. And you can still tell this is the same artist. It's just that the prolific nature of their output doesn't feel as considered and vital anymore as we get into these more experimental. Well, let's try. This album tries gothic metal influenced clean vocals, which tries to break into these post punk esque moments of misery, but doesn't really get there with it. And it ends up sounding kind of funny, you know. And then the vocals have the black metal and the death metal vocals, which there are many different techniques being used there. Now they reach for this guttural, disgusted sort of uh, barking, which doesn't really serve any sort of tunefulness or discernible lyrics. It's just like a noise that he's making, and to me, it begins to feel like a lot of uh, like an automatic exercise, and some of it feels a little bit like a parody of multiple genres in a mashup, and that's where I kind of fall off of the Bandcamp black metal ride. And I'm not usually such a dick. I like challenging um, motoric and savant music, especially when it's extreme. But there was a point in this album where it was just not for me. You know, it just, I couldn't sit with this more than once. And as I got to the third listen, there's this pair of 12 and 15-minute songs at the end where I couldn't sit through it again. And I'm not saying anything poorly about the artist, but I just don't think that this is for me anymore. And that's a shame, again, because I liked so many of his previous works. That this just isn't up to the same standard. It's just kind of slipshod and croaked out, and doesn't seem to be developing new skills as fast as it generates new interests to explore. And yeah, I don't mean to rant about it. It just wasn't. It's a weird thing. Um, Uranium is a what can we call this? A Black Death industrial record, and we could call it an industrial metal record with some power electronics and dark ambient influences, and but I think we could call this a death industrial record and get away with it for the most part. There are reasonable feature of electric guitars all over this album, and frantic beats. But that's not really where it gets interesting. It gets interesting when the power electronic side takes over. I think that's the best part of this record, and it's a little bit hit or miss otherwise. Um, I don't listen to a ton of this kind of thing because there isn't a ton of it that's any really worth approaching from my point of view. So maybe this is an exceptional example. So this is not my area of expertise, and I really haven't looked into a lot more than just because there is so much. So take that with a grain of salt. I think that it didn't reach an experiential point so much as it reached an experimental point. I think there's a good experiment happening here, but I don't think that it created an experience that was quite as unforgettable as some of their peers in this space, especially on this label where there's some really talented dark industrial acts that kind of make for a memorable experience. This is more like a creepy hallway to go down once, but then once you've seen the house, the haunted house, it's less scary the next time you go through it, if that makes sense. Um, so, Love Gang is a Denver, Colorado based heavy rock band, a blues rock band, and one that aims for very much what I would consider the 1968 to 70 um, heavy rock uh, uh, shakeup. Uh, not, this is not a Led Zeppelin cover band. This is much more of a blue cheer kind of thing, which I would equate with the first couple of Deep Purple albums on some level. I hear a bit of MC5 in their work, but Mean Streak almost feels like an album rooted in the era where rock and roll was a mode, a thing that people did, and these songs were written with charisma, but a lot of the same, uh, the actual structure of the music is entirely traditional. So they weren't quite mangling the blues and strangling it with distortion. They were buzzing about making their own hot-headed version of it. So that's the feeling that these guys capture, and it is extremely retro in that sense. Um, Most of the songs here work when they do break into something that's a little bit more serious. Like my favorite band from like the early 70s is probably like something like Atomic Rooster, and they kind of get there with one or two of these songs. But uh, I like by virtue of loving this type of music, I'm all for it. But I don't think if this is all you listen to that this is going to be anything more than just kind of a solid example of something that captures that feeling than that time in music. So that's valuable to a lot of people. It is to me. So make your own judgment on that, and in that regard. Uh, Die Ober Herren and Die by My Hand. It does something similar, but it approaches gothic metal of the '80s. I'm sorry, not gothic metal at all. Gothic rock, gothic pop rock of the '80s, and the way I see it, there is a lot of Susie and the Banshees in the way this album is put together. Though they do reference like Billy Idol and Adam and the Ants, even though I think Adam and the Ants for me, I associate with a little bit more of a stark post-punk feeling, and this is warmer. It's got a lot more layers. It's got a lot of group and heavily layered vocals, which there I think there is at least one at one time former member of Ghost in here, and then we have the vocalist from the Coffin Shakers, which is how can I put that? It's a what would we call that? A country punk or a gothic punk band from a different era, although they are still around. And then they've got the guitarist and songwriter from heavy psychedelic rock group Rise and Shine, and you definitely get the classic rock feeling from a lot of these arrangements. They're all very similar, and they all express in a different way by way of a lot of the vocal hooks and the chorales and the they really reach for the anthemic side of gothic popular rock of a certain era, and it's not as campy as like a Ghost record in more recent times, but it definitely would probably appeal to that fan um, who was looking for something a little bit more campy or a little bit more occult and bloody, I guess is the way you would put it. So for me, it never reaches a point of kind of genuine spiritual breakthrough, as more as it's just kind of a fun, um, a little bit dark gothic rock record, and I thought that's all right. I'm not the biggest Susie and the Banshees fan, and that's kind of where I would place this style of songwriting personally. See what you think if you're more of an expert on that kind of thing. I only dabble for the sake of just a little bit of historicity. Um, so that's it for the week on that. And yeah, see if any of those are worth checking out on your end.